Hey there, folks. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from, of course, the Philanthropy Mastermind series and sporting my newest shirt because it was my wedding anniversary this weekend. So I had to do something a little different. If I'm blending into my background, that's the reason. But I'm really happy to welcome you here this time. We have a very interesting conversation ahead. So I'm so glad you could make time for it. If you are catching this in recorded form, of course, we'll make sure that you have links to the participants today so you can learn more about their work and follow it on the road ahead. But if you're here with us live, this is also an opportunity for you to engage in the conversation if you want. And one way to do that, of course, is to warm up the chat, which you can probably see to your right, maybe your left or down the bottom of the screen. But if you want to, and we'd love it if you would, you can help us warm that up by saying hello and maybe where you're here from, which part of the country or the world. We would love to know all of that. And I know our guests would. And while you're doing that, and we can see you're already doing it. So, well, that's Sherry. Okay, well, thank you, Sherry. Yes, she's coming in from Chicago, and I'll be introducing Sherry to you in just a moment. While we're waiting for you to do that, of course, we want to make sure we give a special shout out to our sponsor of the series, which is DonorSearch. DonorSearch has been providing a platform for these discussions since back in 2016. And we're doing a couple of these per week for 46 weeks out of this year, in addition to our podcast, which is available on most Fridays with conversations with people in the space, much like part of the conversation we'll be having today. So all of that's available to you over on the DonorSearch site at donorsearch.net under the resources tab. You can check that out there. And while you're there, if you want to learn more about DonorSearch, because we will not be talking about the company during the conversation today, you can do that right at the DonorSearch site. And if you want to know more about your donors, which I suppose you do, that's a great place to find out more about them. But I'll let you learn about all that at donorsearch.net. But for today, of course, we're having a conversation with Yamilée Toussaint Beach and also Sherry Quam Taylor. And I'll give just the briefest of introductions here and let us dive into a conversation which actually Sherry developed the title for. So I'm going to read it so that I get it right. But the thing that sticks out for me is 10X, as it may have for you, which is Nonprofit Leader Spotlight, scaling your nonprofits 10 times through regular investments, risk, and innovation. That's a lot of activity, but it's possible, whether you're big or small, to have big goals and achieve them. And if you are making time to be a part of this conversation today, you're about to find out exactly how you can do that with Yamilée Toussaint Beach, and of course with Sherry Quam Taylor, who brought us all together today. So first of all, Sherry is the CEO of Quam Taylor. If you don't know her work, I hope you'll check that out. We'll make sure to include a link in the chat today. And Yamilée also is here as the founder and CEO of STEM from Dance. Once again, we'll make sure there's a link to that for you. So let's see where to begin. Actually, Sherry, if I can turn to you to just say hello and maybe just a quick thumbnail about yourself.
Yeah, Jay, thanks for having me back. And it's a privilege to be here with, I don't have client favorites, but I'll say one of my favorite clients and most successful clients. But I'm just excited for other leaders, other fundraisers to be inspired by Yamilée, like I'm inspired by her, not only by her story, but just the precision as to which she has approached growing her organization. I want people to be inspired. I want them to feel abundant and perhaps maybe see the revenue potential that their organization might have. And so I'm just really excited for her to tell her story, and hopefully I'll share a little bit of the work we've done together and how she's grown her organization. So thanks for having us.
It's great to have you here, and it's great to be back. It's been a long time.
It has.
And we did, or rather Jack did already put a link to Sherry's contact information, or rather her website, in the chat. So you're going to want to check that out. That's Thanks. At, for those who are watching this later, that's at QuamTaylor.com. So Yamilée, would you do us the honors of telling us a little bit about yourself and about STEM from Dance?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Let's see, so I founded STEM from Dance 12 years ago. And I had a vision for making the experience of learning about STEM more exciting, more relevant, more joyful. And that came from my own experience studying engineering at MIT, and seeing how few people of color, specifically women of color, there were in my classes. And that compelled me to become a high school math teacher after I graduated, so I could learn more about what was taking place in the K-12 system. And what I learned is that oftentimes it's students' mindsets towards STEM that push them away from it. You know, I would hear things like, math isn't for me. I'm more of a this kind of person. And what I later went on to find out is that it's as young as 8 years old when most girls believe that they can't do math. And that's what I wanted to change. I thought about my experience as a dancer because I've been dancing my whole life, and dance has always been a source of joy. And I just started to wonder, is there a way that the joy, the culture, the creativity of dance can make STEM more appealing for girls? And that's the journey that I set out on. And so fast forward to present day, we do just that. We're creating these spaces where girls can feel like they belong in STEM while making these dance performances that incorporate STEM. So imagine costumes that light up when they dance, where they're making the circuit, they're learning about electricity, they're programming the circuit so that every time they jump, their arms light up, or whatever the interaction is. And they get to dream this performance and take the role of not just dancer, but technologist. And we've just seen time and time again that it's that experience that reverses that narrative, and shows them that they can in fact be a programmer, a scientist, an engineer. And that's the work that we've been doing for the past decade, and excited to really take it to the next level in the future.
I have so many questions about this, and I know, Sherry, you're going to dive in here and help us make sure we cover every part of this conversation. But one of the first ones is about the age groups of the participants in the program. Can you talk about that, where they're coming from also? Because as you said, the experience of an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old, and my wife was a teacher in 4th and 5th and teaching math and science, and she talks about this a lot, that that's one of those inflection points too, where you see this gender differentiation, sometimes, you know, influenced by parents who might have their own biases about what is possible for their child. So what's the age group of these kids, and are you able to really, you know, make sure that that you're in there early enough to help them to see what's possible?
Yeah, so we start at 8 years old because of what I stated earlier, and we work with them through college. So at each age, there's different sort of like milestones that happen when it comes to STEM mindsets and behavior. So we're trying to play a positive role along that journey, which is why we sort of have this wide spectrum, but the experiences that they have are differentiated along the way.
Yeah. And what about the dance experience also? Because you described one thing, which I kind of visualize it, the idea of people coming together and making that circuit connection, which sounds both really fun and really clear. What kind of dance is being practiced here, and who's choreographing it? Is that being done by you and your team, by the participants themselves, some combination?
Yeah, so we try to expose them to different dance styles and then let them choose what they want to choreograph within. So they choreograph. So you can imagine, you start to get into the mind of like a 10-year-old when you see what they create, which is just so amazing. And they get to also choose what message they want to convey. What message do they as young people want to tell the world about who they are, what they care about through dance and through technology? So they make the piece from beginning to end. They choose the song, what they wear. And we hear so many times that for many of them, this is the first time that they've been like trusted by, you know, adults to create something. And we reserve a theater for them before we even see anything that they create, because we know that they're going to be brilliant. We know they're going to create something spectacular. We just need to give them the space and the authority to be able to create that.
You know, as you talk about this, one of the things that strikes me is that some people, when I think about STEM, oftentimes people are very immersed in something that can be in their head to some degree. Not always. Sometimes it's physically represented, like especially in the engineering piece, right? When people start from, let's say, Legos and then go into first Lego League and then robotics, whatever it is, and sometimes then there are people observing what they do. But mathematics often is a discipline where you're right there and you're doing the thing, and there's not much to watch. I mean, it's happening in your head. But dance is quite different, right? If you're doing it, there is a performance element to it. So is there also kind of a crossing the chasm that occurs in terms of personality, where you're empowering people through STEM, but you're also, you're allowing them to feel kind of comfortable in their bodies, dealing with this kind of intellectual assignment, which is much more, outward than sometimes STEM can be inward.
What's compelling to me is being able to develop young people as the whole person that they are, right? There is like when you think about STEM, it is very technical, and there's a lot of like knowledge and skills that are involved. And I know when I was studying engineering, I found that sometimes my classmates weren't always like very personable. And that matters. It's not enough to be knowledgeable, especially when you want to make a positive impact in the world. It does help to be creative and artistic and to see things in different and unique ways. And as a dancer, there were times when I saw that my training as an engineer helped me to choreograph, especially when you have a lot of dancers. Each dancer has to be in a particular place and move at a particular time. There's just like an ability to think spatially that came in handy in choreographing. And so I just think there's things that we can get from both of these disciplines. And when I think about, the next generation, how powerful is it that those who will be creating the next innovations of the world and tackling these big problems can do so holistically. And that's what I think our young people will enter the world and have an impact, because they're going to have it's like a unique perspective. They're coming with the ability to think creatively, to work as a team, and also just understand things like coding and artificial intelligence and so on.
There's so much to unpack in all of this, and one of it might be what it's like from the outside looking at the organization and whether or not people can immediately get it. Although I'm sure you're the kind of advocate that helps people to get it, but it still takes a little bit of openness, right? Sherry,
Absolutely.
I'm curious to, if you could talk about that, because what you described this as working together, but did you understand what this was when you first met?
Yeah, I think like, Yamilée, these are like her two passions that's like, it's very natural for her to merge together, which she can speak to. But yeah, I think it's always a concern sometimes when I start working with people when we say, hey, do we think our funders really get what we do? I mean, a simple thing like, there's a certain age and up, but we don't know what coding is. Like, what is it? It's like, we don't know what it is. So like, what do you mean it's making their arms light up to like Beyonce? Like, how does that even fit in with technology? And so I think, to me, fundraising is removing what people don't understand so they can really see how lives are being changed and how their gift can impact somebody's life. And so I know that's something that Yamilée has done a lot of work in. She's invested in that messaging in her organization to really bring clarity to how those two things sit very strongly together, not only through her own life, but in messaging, in her speaking engagements, and her opportunities that she has to tell her story. But it's not an immediate like, oh, that makes so much sense. Sometimes it's someone's leaning more arts or someone's leaning more science, and there sometimes has to be some explanation about the mission. Yamilée, talk a little bit about how maybe those two things have come together for you, or like questions you've gotten, or clarity, and maybe even with funders.
Yeah, I think back to the early days when I was figuring out how to compel people towards this idea at the same time, trying to figure out exactly what it was to make it an organization, not just these things that have been present in my life. And it was it was a long learning curve. I had to like see people's faces and wait for the moment when like the light bulb goes off and like try different things. Like, okay, I started to realize that when I can illustrate how these two come together, funders would like the light bulb would go off. When they got to like see my passion for it, like that would make them more excited. And so the way that I talk about it now is completely different than how I talked about it even like a couple of years ago. And I'm constantly evolving in that way because I do know that it can be difficult to understand, and yet it's like one of the most important things that people do understand is like what we do, especially those who are in a position to support the work.
Yeah. I think that's what's interesting, Jay, of what I've loved watching with Yamilée as she attracts funders. I mean, she, there's nothing like a founder story, right? And a vision cast from a founder. And I think that like, which, I love that you listed the title I gave you because it's like 10X, what in the world? But I do tell a story to people of the day I met Yamilée, which was on Zoom, where I had 2 interviews with 2 prospective clients, one being Yamilée, one being another client that I went to work with as well. And I remember, I always ask people, what are your growth plans? Where's this organization going to be, in even 5 years? And Yamilée was, we're going to 10X. And I believed her. And it was so interesting because I remember the day because the other person said, oh, I'm not sure. We typically kind of grow 7%, 10%. Like I just never really let myself think that big, And so I tell people like there's out of those 2 people, one organization is on that path to growing to 10X, and Yamilée's ahead of schedule. I'll let her tell you that. But I think like what's so inspiring about Yamilée is she has set her goals high. And I think that oftentimes in the nonprofit space, the biggest mistake people make is not setting aggressive goals and not then putting the infrastructure, the plan, the team, the equipping, the training in place that actually propels her to reach that goal. And so I'm reading Grant Cardone's The 10X Rule Book, and every page I'm like, oh yeah, that's Yamilée. Yep, that's Yamilée. Because really goal setting, anybody can goal set, anybody can do stretch budgets. But then not everybody, especially in the nonprofit space, says, okay, well, if I want to be 10X in so many years, what do I need to spend? What do I need to invest? What kind of team does that look like that needs to be around me? What do I as the leader need to stop doing so I can start doing other things and be propelling the organization to a greater level? And so that I've watched Yamilée do that time and time again, that I think it really sets her apart as a leader, and especially as an organization who is scaling and reaching their goal year after year and ahead of her 10X schedule. So I'd love for, I want people to be inspired by her to really understand you can set big goals and you have to invest in your team and self with the resources and the education and the tools to then reach those goals. You can't do it alone. And she's got an incredible team around her.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that, Yamilée, about where the big, bold vision came from for the growth? I mean, you have a vision for the organization. I know we'd all love to hear more, even more about that. But what about for the growth? Where did you come up with the 10X?
Well, when the organization turned 10 years old, it was a moment for me. Doing something for 10 years, it just felt significant. And so I was in a very deep state of reflection and starting to dream about what the future could hold. And I think what resonated with me the most is wanting to make a tangible impact. The the figure is that it's only 4% of the STEM workforce that consists of women of color. Like, I want to change that number. I want to be part of changing that number. Not by like decimal points, but like by like, you know, have a noticeable difference to that number. And I think it can change in my lifetime, and I want to be part of that. And so that's where the idea of wanting to reach 1 million girls in 10 years came from, because that's what we believe it takes to actually change the needle for our part of the greater ecosystem. And the way I think is not like, is it possible to do 1 million? It's like, no, what do we need to put in place so that that 1 million is possible? And I am, you know, it takes an amount of, you know, humility to say that there's things that we have been doing for years that will now need to change in order to reach this vision, and to kind of step away from what has been the norm to change that. So we create a new strategic plan to outline our path towards that number. I think that's around the time when I started working with Sherry to say, okay, we also put a dollar amount to say that we then need to be at least a $10 million organization. And so then the question for me is like, okay, it's not like, oh, I don't know if I could raise that money because I didn't, but I'm sure there are people, like, I know it's possible. There are people who have done it, and there's people who can help me and teach me. And that's what excited me about working with you, Sherry, is being able to have somebody alongside me to help reach that like bigger target.
Yeah, and Yamilée is like the precision, you know, this is where the dance and the choreography, I tell her, like, I think if I say, hey, move your leg 1 inch, like, I'll tell her one little thing in coaching and through a conversation with a donor, she's like, got it, I'll be right back. Like, and she's like, move the needle enough to see results. But Jay, you know what's been so interesting with this big vision is, you know, it's attracted funders who think big. It's attracted people who are innovative and are okay investing in things that might feel risky or big, or like, how are you gonna do? Well, how are we gonna 10x your organization? And so it's been so interesting to hear funders where I think we're conditioned, and our invisible scripts are like, oh, funders don't want to invest in risk. Funders, you know, they want to start small and not invest in big ways, or whatever those scripts are that we tell ourselves. Like, it's actually somewhat been the opposite for Yamilée, for people to say, oh, wait, tell me more. We want to do that. We want to invest in that. And we actually want it to be big. And we actually want it to be multi-year. And so the shift in Yamilée sitting at the table and asking for what she needs based on her vision has attracted an incredible list of funders. And she's been successful in securing a lot of funding. When sometimes we would think like that feels like a bit of a stretch. And so I want to encourage people to ask for what you need, and don't decide for any funder that you're sitting in the room with. You own your mission, you own your vision, and you sit and ask for what you need. And that's really what Yamilée does, and been a huge part of her success.
You just touched on something that's so important for people who are listening, which is that you don't want to decide for the donor, but that also means you don't want to make a decision not to talk to the donor at all. So it's not just asking for too little or asking for things that you think are safe for that donor. It's even reaching out to people in the first place. You're clearly doing that, Yamilée. So I'm curious to know just some of the mechanics of that. How you identified people who you thought would have a passion for this when maybe it wasn't always really readily apparent. And then what kinds of things you said to them or delivered to them to help them see themselves as people who could be your partner in this project, so therefore be more willing to invest significantly rather than just kind of give you one of those, you know, like your nice person gifts.
Yes.
Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yes, I think as far as identifying partners, I often look at my peers in the work, especially those who have been around longer than we have and doing like similar work, So I'm definitely paying attention to who's supporting them. And then also I have this like regular practice of going to our existing funders and asking them who we should be talking to. So and I'd say when it comes to dance and STEM, some of the like major players in those areas are very Googleable. So I feel like identifying folks who could be interested has been maybe the easier part compared to then, getting in touch and being like making a compelling ask. I think what I have learned early on in my journey is that people are going to invest in me and be compelled by me almost even before the organization. Like, I've seen how people respond to me telling my story, and I lean into that because I want them to have a connection to me. I want them to hear how much I care about this, how much I believe in what we're trying to accomplish, and I found that to be compelling. And I'm just constantly listening. I think about one of our like long-term partners. I think they started funding us about 5 years ago. And so I was earlier in my tenure as a leader. And at this time, I sometimes just had ideas that I would just share, but I'm just like, as I'm sharing my different ideas, I'm just like paying attention to like, what piques their interest? Where do they kind of lean in? Where are they like nodding for? And in that case, they were interested in the summer program that didn't exist, but I have a tendency to just like project what could be. And because of their like seed funding, we were able to build this summer program that, fast forward to now is taking place in 7 cities across the United States. It just took kind of like seeing that piqued their interest. And even, I think that is like a great example because it wasn't just like piquing that initial interest, but I will say like when they funded that initial summer program, it didn't yield the result that I anticipated. And that's always like a bit of a scary moment as a new grantee. But I was able to like continue to compel them by the vision that I had for that program, for the organization, and the changes that I would put in place. And fast forward today, they recently made a 5-year commitment to the organization after funding us for 5 years. And when I look back at that journey, I think it was like, yes, the initial engagement in my own story, but it was also just this relationship that we were able to build where they got to see that the vision evolved, it got bigger, I was growing, the organization was progressing. And I think that was also really compelling for them.
Wow, I love this. And Sherry, I'm sure you have thoughts on this too, because trust is a big issue in all of fundraising. And one of the things we've all been talking about a lot in the last few years is about the difficulty organizations have in going past the initial thrill of hearing a story that's compelling, but then building trust, because it usually takes some reporting to do it. And then being able to lean into that donor relationship so they'll invest for the long term or invest bigger. And you just gave explained exactly how that happened. It sounds like there was some reporting along the way, which you were doing so that they learned to not just trust your story, but trust your organization, which is a different thing. Sherry, can you talk about that too, about how important that is?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you can imagine that a mechanical engineer has an amazing evaluation process and metrics and is always tweaking that and, is passionate about making sure funders understand how their gift is used. And that's fun to watch for me even. But I'd also say on that, like, know, like, and trust factor. One thing that I watch Yamilée do that few others invest in is actually being that visible thought leader. She's a rock star in the space. And too often, I think, a lot of leaders their hands are too deep in the programs. They couldn't think of consistently posting on LinkedIn or going to that conference or flying overseas to meet with a funder. How would we do that? And so part of, I think, that trust and that keeping the relationship warm that I witnessed Yamilée do is she actually has built an incredible leadership team and program team that have allowed her to move over into being truly that face of the organization, and face as a woman who is fighting, to increase that 4% statistic that she mentioned. She invests in her message and her speaking and that consistency. And oftentimes I think that PR, marketing, communications from the leader feels like an extra that we should do, and maybe we should put it in the budget, but one day we may. But I think it has been a huge part of building that trust factor, and that continually the funders hear her expertise and her thoughts on something, and she's not hiding her opinions from anyone. She is a mouthpiece for people who are trying to solve this problem, and funders trust her because of her consistency in being out there. Hop on LinkedIn and follow her to see an example of that. And so that feels like an extra, something that we'll do eventually someday. But this is just another example of Yamilée saying, if I want to be this size, this is part of the engine that I'm building, and this is the fuel that needs to go in it. And so that consistency, I think, has been a big part of the trust factor with funders.
I love the way you're both describing that, because again, there's this tendency, I think, in the field sometimes for people to say it's all about vision or it's all about the mechanics, and it really is about both. I mean, you've obviously, you're not building a car that's just pretty on the outside or just well engineered on the inside. If it's not both, you're never going to sell it and have it run and have people want to come back and buy another one. That's the worst drawn out analogy ever. But I am curious about something else you said, Yamilée, earlier, which was about how the way you've described this program to people to support it has evolved. And I'd love to hear more about that, especially if that evolution is just your own evolution and the way you find what works for you. But also, I mean, if it's 12 years now, you've probably seen an evolution among donors. And so maybe part of your storytelling and more has to do with also how you're perceiving change in the audience as they mature and recognize the value of what you're doing. So can you talk to us about the changes and where they come from?
Yes, I'd say it's two things. One is that I focus on people understanding the root of this issue that we're tackling. I believe at the root of the underrepresentation of women in STEM are the mindsets that form in girls at a young age. And that negative mindset towards STEM propagates to us seeing that it's just, such a small percentage. And as people understand that that is the root, our use of dance makes more sense. Because I think people can draw a stronger correlation to building confidence and experiencing joy through dance than like connecting STEM to dance. And so as I help them understand that connection to changing mindsets at a young age through dance, and then how we weave STEM into that, I find that sequence of information is easier to follow. So that's one change. And second, now that the nature of our work is national, it's a very different way to talk about what we have in store and what we're trying to accomplish. We used to be this, small organization operating just in New York City. But now, like I mentioned, we have programs in multiple cities. Our vision is to see a program happen in every state, in urban cities, rural areas, right? That's the I want people to think big when they think of the organization, bigger than we actually are at the moment, because I want them to see the space that they have to help us to grow. And so like maybe I would have ended my little 2-minute, 3-minute spiel about the exciting work that we're doing in a summer camp. Now I'm helping people to see like, hey, what we're doing, it can scale. Look at the progress we made so far. This is where we're headed. 1 million girls in 10 years. You know, like I want them to feel like, whoa, like I want them to sit back in their seats as they hear the story, because it helps understand the impact, because it's more than it being a cute thing for girls to be dancing and coding. Like, oh, that's nice. But for them to see that this is a change agent to change representation in STEM, that's what I want them to walk away with.
And do you mind just telling us the simplest thing about why that's important? Why is it important that these young women, and so many of them, are going to be, going through this process?
Yes, the world needs these girls that STEM from Dance serves to be in STEM, because I think we could all see that the world is facing some significant challenges, some that can be solved through science, through technology. And it is a proven fact that teams that are more diverse are more innovative. And we need innovation. And there's a perspective that these girls have that is unlike anyone else in the room. And them being in the room changes the outcome. So I just strongly believe that the answers to some of our biggest problems lies in this population being part of the room, and not in every level, from entry to C-suite. These girls belong and deserve to be there. And I think the impact will be tangible.
I've got kind of a crazy question, which is that, well, I'm talking to 2 women founders, and I'm very mindful of that. But I'm also aware that this is not unique anymore, thankfully, right? That we found a huge change going back a little bit in history from 1972 to today. Lots of changes among the role that women have played in terms of wealth creation and lots of things. Clearly not the change we need to see that you're working on every day, but lots of change. I'm wondering what it's like now when you go and you talk to prospective and current donors, if you're seeing more women in those chairs making those decisions, and if the conversations you're having are different because they already get it, or if they also need a bit of this inoculation of wisdom about the potential, that space that you're creating, to help them to see not just where you are, where you're going to be as a result of the work. So where are women as donors and kind of audiences as you're having these conversations?
Sherry, do you want to go first?
I'm gonna let you go with that.
Okay.
You have a lot of female donors, very strong donors.
Yes, yes. And I think sometimes there's a greater likelihood that they will resonate with the mission more quickly, because maybe they've had the experience of being the only woman in a room. You know, they may have had the experience of dancing as a child and experiencing that boost of confidence. Maybe they've studied STEM and know how difficult it is. Maybe they've experienced all 3 of those. So I think, when that's the case, that makes the mission like that much easier to understand. Another layer I would add to this conversation is just the experience of not just women, but women of color and people of color in these spaces. Something that I have become more informed of is just how significantly underfunded nonprofits that are led by people of color are compared to those that are not. And that's a conversation that I'm having more and more with funders, because there is an apparent issue and there's little accountability for it. And a lot of times we see that organizations that may serve majority Black and brown kids are not led by a Black or brown funder. And sometimes they get majority of the funding, right? And so I think there's a problem that exists in leadership, and I know that's reflected in philanthropy as well. So something I ask funders is how much they are aware of that, because oftentimes they're in a position to change that.
Mhm. I think, and I feel like what Yamilée is kind of saying is, like, we have to move to having a conversation about that. You know, I was on a webinar recently, and it was a large foundation said, which we all think of as this, these big gatekeepers, but they said, hey, let's move from application to conversation. Like, come in and talk to us. And I think Yamilée's been very open, has played the long game in many situations where, you know, it's not just, oh, applications due, let's get it in. It's, well, hold on, who do we know on the inside? Couldn't we get a conversation first? Because when you know Yamilée and you meet her, you know, it's like, who wouldn't want to fund her, right? But she's having the conversation. She's having different conversations, deeper conversations, financial conversations, tough conversations. And that's fundraising, that's relational fundraising. And so we can't shy away from having these hard discussions sometimes. And she's seeing results because she's done that.
It does seem like we've been having conversations around these things for a long time, especially the past 3 years. And that's why I asked about whether or not you'd seen a change in the composition of the rooms where people were making these financial decisions, and if that was helping. And it sounds like you're finding lots of receptive audiences wherever you go, and that makes sense, both in terms of people's understanding, but also the demographics that we're witnessing. But it also means that they can probably see the future. I would hope. I should say, I would hope that they can see the future a little differently, maybe than when you were doing this 10 years ago. They don't even need to necessarily draw from their own experience. They can just see how the world is changing, what the opportunity is for these girls, these young women, especially women of color. And I'm wondering, as you are looking forward, well, a couple things. First of all, how far are you in that journey of the 10 times growth? And then what are the bigger goals next? And how do you think you're going to work towards achieving those? Because I know this is never a static thing, that you're always thinking about what's next to have the impact you want to see.
Yes. So with Sherry, I was able to make a 10-year plan for how we would reach that 10 million. And we both kind of had this understanding that, like, that's the plan, but we're gonna,
but let's do it faster.
Right, exactly. And that is what's taking place. We are tracking ahead of the plan, which is exciting. And I think, you know, really right now, the biggest opportunity we see is being able to grow our team. Like, for the 12 years that I have led STEM for Fans, I've been a development team of 1. And we want to change that.
So are you looking to expand, and what are your needs because I know that there's a battle for talent out here, but there's also an intense interest in the things that you are doing. So how are you trying to bring in people now?
Yes, so we launched a new role. It's a Chief Development Officer, and I am beyond excited to have a partner in this work. I hear that I'm maybe one of the rare CEO EDs who, like, actually don't mind leaning into fundraising, to the point where, in addition to bringing on this Chief Development Officer, we are also bringing on a Chief Program and Growth Officer and a Chief Finance and Operating Officer, with the intention that these senior leaders on the team can free up my capacity so that I can be that thought leader, ambassador, fundraiser for the organization. And so I am very excited about this evolution of the team, because I know it's what's needed to take us to the next level and to sustain the work. And so when it comes to our ambitious 10X goals, we know that at this point, there's a need for just a bigger team to execute the vision.
Mhm. Yeah, I always say Yamilee's an excellent fundraiser, and she needs a co-pilot fundraising. You know, she needs that person who thinks as big as she does, that can just open twice as many doors that she's able to open herself. And that can get her in more, you know, Fortune 500 rooms, and funders who have capacity to really make transformational gifts. And so it's an incredible opportunity. I'm sure the job posting is on the website and in her LinkedIn a post not too long ago. It's an incredible opportunity to work with an incredible leader, as everybody's hearing today. You know, what I want for Yamilee is somebody who has done what she's doing, who has worked very close with another CEO to 2x, 3x, 5x the revenue, who can come in and not need their hand held, but really link arms with Yamilee and even speed up the growth even faster than she's done it herself. So check that out or spread the word, because it really is an amazing opportunity.
Yamilée, is that on the website right now and in your LinkedIn? Because we can probably grab it and put in the chat as well. If so,
Yeah, I
okay.
could, yep, and I could put it in the chat as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And we'll make sure that that's included in the recording notes as well. You just made a point about the importance of working with a CEO, an ED who's actually willing to go out there and ask, because it's a frequent complaint among many people in development that we have to work to inculcate this desire or willingness or even you know, overcome the fear of some of the things that people do in fundraising. And you're clearly just willing to go and make things happen. And if you also have a program partner, and that's probably another one of these things you're doing, then that's a great opportunity to have. We didn't ask at all about your board. Is your board also similarly inclined to put their foot on the pedal along with you and make these things happen?
The board is emerging in that area. You know, they are like so compelled by our mission, and I think they struggle with some of like the common board member struggles of like, I don't know if I have the network, and you know, it's gonna be awkward to ask my friends. And so that's some of the work Sherry and I've been doing with them, is just really showing them a different approach that doesn't feel icky, and really show them that they do have the power to compel people towards the mission, and that they can partner with me to do that. And there's been so many bright spots. I think, you know, it took a while to build that mindset, but you know, I think about one board member who you know, for the first time brought a 5K gift in from a colleague from his at work, and it didn't take that many moves. It was just like as simple as him like organizing the three of us to have a conversation on Zoom, and he got to see that I'm not just gonna get on the Zoom and start asking this person for money, but it was a conversation that felt very authentic, that I was able to continue on and eventually make an ask. And he didn't have to feel icky at all about it. In fact, he ran into that coworker at like an in-person event, and he was wearing like his Step from Dad's hat. Shout out to my board member wearing swag. And she was like, hey, like I want one too. And we sent her swag in the mail too. So all of it just felt very good. It was like a very nice experience. And I feel like it took the mindset shifting that Sherry and I have done for that to take place.
Right. Well, I'm sure that as you've had these successes and all these girls have gone through the program, that's given them additional encouragement too. So that's both understandable where the challenges are, but wonderful to hear how they've been coming along with you. You know, as we get towards the end of the hour together, I did want to see if I could ask both of you if you have any kind of quick, almost cheat sheet answers to the question that every small nonprofit has, which is if they have a vision, and you have a special one, but if they have a vision that's powerful and they're willing to pursue it like you've pursued yours, Are there some things that you really do think an organization would need to have in place in order to be successful? And maybe the top 3 or 4 or 5 things, which that's the checklist to then say, okay, here's our goal. These things are the things we need to do in order to achieve it.
You know, I'd say 2 things that were key to some of my success. I think one is having clear strategic direction. I know my strategic plan in and out, forwards, backwards. I speak about it on almost every conversation I'm having externally. It has been effective in helping people understand where we're going and how we're going to get there in a way that's like simple, clear, and that has just been like such an important tool for me. I would say previously, like I kind of mentioned before, I just say that the latest ideas in my mind, and having this clear strategic plan has made sure that what I'm saying externally aligns with what's happening internally, and I'm not going rogue, because as now a 12-year leader, I shouldn't be going rogue. And so that has just been such a great tool for me. So I strongly recommend, again, not just having the plan that is like a document that you're like supposed to have as a nonprofit, but one that you really believe in and can speak to very simply and clearly. That has been instrumental for me. And second, I think when we reach this inflection point, like if you look at our trajectory, it kind of looks like an exponential curve. The tipping point for me as a leader was when I started to surround myself with people who've been there, done it, and almost like cared enough about me and our mission to help me figure out the path forward. I just started to get sharper with the way I was spending my time, the choices I was making. You know, like the person who connected Sherry and I, you know, she's like my executive coach, and she's led a nonprofit before, she supported them. So she was able to say, at this point, you should be thinking about this. And I was able to build a sense of trust in her that like whatever she says to do, like I'm going to take heed to it because she has that experience. And, you know, I think about that with you as well, Sherry. Like, I feel like I didn't realize how much fundraising is something that really can be learned. And I feel like I was going about it with like my best guess. Like, I think this is what you talk about with a funder. And I remember the moment when I had a lunch with a billionaire, and I'm like, Sherry, like, what do I do? Like, what do we talk about? And she was like, I was thinking like I should ask for money. He's a billionaire. And Sherry was like, don't do that. Everybody asks for money, you know, like build a relationship. And that would have not crossed my mind, right? But it took somebody who's done it to show me that. And I feel like I've just gotten so much more effective because of these people who have helped me. So I just strongly encourage like finding like expert help, like trusted people. I know those 2 things have been really influential for me.
Love that. I mean, the only thing I would add to that would be, I mean, and Yamilée's done it. I challenge people, if you have set this big vision, and maybe it's 10x, maybe it's 2x, maybe it's 5x, have an honest moment with yourself to say, am I actually budgeting in a way that helps me invest in my organization that actually yields that dollar amount? So I think that the sector is full of, we want to be this, but I can't add staff, I can't add training, you know, all of these things. And so build honest budgets that represent your financial need. Programs, admin, fundraising, overhead, reserve. If you don't do that, like it's going to be really hard to raise to that number. And so I would ask people just to pause and be honest with themselves to say, I have a big vision and there's a big financial need that comes with that vision, and own it. And then create the team, the plan that actually yields that. Then when you learn how to do hours to dollars fundraising and you pivot out of just campaigns and appeals and events and actually learn how to have conversations with donors and lead them to their best gift, that's a game changer. And so I just really, it's like, I love, same with my business. It's like when I started investing in myself, my business is 11 years old, similar, kind of similar to Yamilée's. There's this huge hockey stick when I started investing in myself. And then I said, oh gosh, my business grows when I invest in myself. It's the same thing. It inspires me to invest in my own clients. We all need that objectivity and that outsider's perspective to do things quicker than perhaps we would ourselves.
That's great advice, and I hope that everybody will follow all of that. It's so essential to have that kind of clear-headedness as you're pursuing that strategic plan. And Yamilée, when you talked about strategic plans, one of the thoughts that went through my head is people often talk about those and don't have them. And so that's where you started. So I appreciated your touching on that as well. Really wonderful to hear about this journey, and congratulations on all the success you've had so far. But I'm sure that you want to go so much further. So hopefully we'll find a good chief development officer who can come up to your energy level and help you achieve these great things. And in the meantime, of course, I want to encourage other folks to follow both of you, learn from what you're doing. You talked about the importance of having good educators and coaches out there, and here are a couple people to at least follow at a distance at a minimum, to learn how you might be able to apply some of these lessons in your own work. So we'll have all that contact information in the chat. We'll also include it in the notes here. But what is the best way for people to reach each of you? How would you like people to follow you? Yamilée?
People can feel free to follow on LinkedIn, on Instagram. That's where I'm most active.
Excellent. Okay. And Sherry?
It's LinkedIn for me, Jay.
Okay.
We're over there every day.
Yes.
We'd love to hear from anybody. Thanks so much.
And thank you to all of you for hanging out as well. We really appreciate you. And if you want to learn more about this series, you can do that over at the DonorSearch site at donorsearch.net, where you'll find a recording of this along with all the other sessions in our series going back to 2016. So thank you all for being here today. Thank you both, Yamilée and Sherry, for hanging out. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Till then, take care.
Thanks, Jay.
Bye.
Thank you.